I've got a question for the staff,
Yep.
and then I've got a general statement. Is that all right?
Yep.
Thank you. And my question is about the growth infrastructure targeted rate and about the implementation, the timing of that. So I understand the whole concept around the greenfields. I understand the concept that it might help reduce the actual section costs and deliver more sections earlier. But at what point in time of a development would that actual targeted rate be levied? Would it a structure plan stage, or is it when it's a zoned change, or?
So, through the chair, that's not laid out now, or not laid out currently. Ultimately, it'll be an important policy decision, and we'd bring it to this table. What we'd be inviting council to do, with appropriate legal advice as well. So the first thing we'd want to, in a sense, the financial motivation here is the sooner we get the money in, the better. And you might argue that a little bit of aggression in that space is going to help focus the attention of the developers on what you want them to get on with as well. So there'll be a motivation that earlier is better. We need to test legally what's appropriate in terms of charging a targeted rate for the provision of a service which may still be only on the kind of 5-year plan. So we'll have to work out what's safe and appropriate there and then give councillors some options. I think the other part of this, and I think we're quickly going to learn this, that a number of these, to the extent that we move into feeling more comfortable about using targeted rates in these sort of situations, a number of them may actually end up being set through the process of negotiation with key developers in certain areas, because we have we've got other requirements of them that we want land to be released so that we can put our bulk infrastructure, arterial roads and pipes and so on in place. And so I think in a lot of areas, particularly when we get into scale conversations, it's going to need to be quite a sophisticated conversation, and you'd probably look to have consultation formally open with that community at the time at which you're looking to negotiate substantive developer agreements. So look, I appreciate that there's quite a lot there. This is new, but we know we've got to get into this stuff to unlock these issues.
Councillor Cashmore, I have two people who want to ask a question of the Mayor. Do you mind if I step in before your statement?
Oh, yep.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not quite sure if this is a question or whether it's just a warning. In terms of...
I got a shrewd idea, Dick.
No. It's not. Mr.
Try and
Mayor,
put a question mark behind it.
I just want to just raise the issue of procurement and the shared services around the CCOs, and just to say that in terms of procurement, we have to be very mindful that the CCOs do have their own boards, they do have their own staff, and the only way that we can come up with a shared service and shared procurement is actually a directive from the council, from the shareholder. The staff cannot tell the CCOs how they will conduct their business.
That's correct.
And I think that's very important to keep in mind, and for the staff to understand that they do not run the CCOs. We are the shareholder, we run the CCOs.
That's right.
And Mr. Chairman, are you aware of that?
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Absolutely, Councillor, and I've had that discussion with one of the CEOs of the CCOs. That person is quite happy for it to come as a directive from council, but has indicated that that is the appropriate way to do it, and that is the way that we would do it.
Thanks.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my commendations, Mr. Mayor, for the main themes that clearly emerged from your proposal. My question to you, though, sort of picks up a point that Councillor Lee made, and that have you given any thought to some sort of independent assessment of the Auckland Council as a whole? Clearly, you know, a dollar saved in a CCO is as valuable as one within the council family, and I think certainly one of the things that is a concern is that degree of rigour is perhaps not so evident in some of the CCOs. So has any thought been given to that type of independent assessment across the whole council?
It certainly has, and I think the point that you and Councillor Simpson and Councillor Lee have all made would be a point shared by all of us, that we have to make sure, and it is a collective we actually in this case, we have to make sure that this council is spending its money as wisely as it needs to, because we have no credibility in going out and asking for more and more unless people are persuaded that what we're using now is being used to good effect. From what I have seen on some of the savings that we anticipate making this year, the council officials are cognizant of that and working on that, and it's our responsibility to make sure it happens. On the CCOs, I think it's section 17A of the Act. It allows us to conduct routine performance reviews of the CCOs, because while we have direct influence over what our own council does, we equally need to apply that requirement for proper expenditure of money on the CCOs. And the whole reason that we had that accountability framework discussion the other day was because there is a feeling out in the public that council-controlled organisations is a misnomer, that we don't exercise much control over them at all. And what applies to council should also apply to the CCOs. So we have to be rigorous in pushing for efficiencies for all of those organisations, and that is a collective responsibility that you, I and every other councillor shares.
So you wouldn't contemplate some independent expertise in that respect?
Where
It does involve, sorry, I'll just interrupt there.
Sorry.
So that is actually done under the auspices of this committee, and there is a program already occurring. At the matter of whether we continue with that program or whether we go back to square one and reassess how we're doing it, but it does involve outside consultants, and it depends on how much we are willing to spend.
I think, just to add to what the chairman said, it is a balance. You do need independent scrutiny sometime. If you're only scrutinising yourself, that might lead to questions as to whether you're getting the right results. I'm equally conscious of the fact, and Penny Bright reminds us of it every meeting, that when you bring in outside consultants, there is a cost attached to that. And I think the same scrutiny would apply to the outside consultants' costs. We want to know that we're getting value for money. If we're spending money on it, that we're getting good results. And that, again, is incumbent on all of us as members of this governing body.
Councillor Casey, you have a very quick question.
I
and
didn't
it's
realise the
Councillor
Mayor wasn't going to be here for the speech, and I have a gift for him. The last Mayor failed miserably on the living wage, and it's 6 years too late, and I'm so happy. It's a man bag to take to your meeting with Mr. Key.
I'm sure it's well intended.
Oh, absolutely.
Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks for your indulgence, Mr Chair. I think, hearing the discussion, I think there's a couple of things that we need to emphasise. And the fact is we are growing very, very fast. We've grown by Hamilton in the past 5 years. We're probably going to do that again in the next 3.5. And that's a real massive challenge for us for the delivery of infrastructure. And the Mayor's slammed the interim transport levy, and most of you know that it was myself went out to the Len Brown's office and suggested this as a way to try and break down the door to have this collaborative discussion. Because prior to that, all that we were doing to make our budgets fit was cutting Auckland Transport's capex and the consequential OPEX that went with that. And that meant that we were going nowhere. In fact, we were going backwards. And now that we've got this massive increase in our population, even more than what we had 3.5, 4 years ago, the challenge is even greater. So the collaborative nature of the Mayor's proposal and those discussions we have to have in half an hour and tonight and tomorrow are vital to get this forward, and we have to be seen to be doing something. So the interim transport levy helped bring the government to the table because it meant that this council had the intestinal fortitude to show that it was serious about solving transport issues. It wasn't going to duck and shove and cry and die. So we got onto it. And now the next discussion is how do we move this to the next place and what form that takes. And that's going to be an iterative process over this term. So I'm sorry we have to depart, but because I would have really liked to hear the debate, and I'll be on record and I'll be listening to it tonight. But I think it's very important that we do remember those key facts, that the challenges aren't going away, and there is that gap in the ATAP proposals of 400 million. And as the Mayor said, that is conservative. The ATAP proposal is conservative. If we want to really make the game change, it has to probably be more than that. Thanks very much, Mr Chair.
And we have a gap of about 100 million in other areas as well, let alone no investment in parks. So we have, we're going back to Councillor Newman, and then we have Councillor Simpson, presumably finishing with questions. Councillor Newman. I'll just remind people, Dave Wood there is actually now the official spokesman for the Mayor.
Oh my God.
But he's not allowed, remember he's not a politician, so he can't answer the political questions. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Dave, the question that I was seeking to tease, well, the discussion I was seeking to tease out here relates to the projections for the future program of renewals in the transport space. And it's a matter that I've been having conversations with Auckland Transport about, and I hope that we will have more discussion with Auckland Transport around the table moving forward, Mr Chair, not only for the annual plan, but also to start to inform the LTP discussions. And my concern is a growing backlog over the coming decade for transport renewals. Even if we are maintaining existing assets at the existing standard, those assets are absorbing more and more traffic. So you could argue that there's a potential for, or a potential actual reduction in real terms. So I'm wanting to know the work that is taking place within the Mayor's office to inform this budget and future budget proposals to ensure that we actually have the renewals correct. And secondly, what steps we're going to take to ensure that we don't get a backlog, because a backlog means that there's a whole lot of growing renewal liability that has to be funded and paid for at some point, and you can't pay for it through growth. Through you, Mr Chair.
Yes, sorry.
What do you think of that?
Trying to organise a coffee for myself. Dave, have you got that covered, please?
Might not be able to answer it right now, but
Yep, through the chair, look, I will hand over to Matthew around some of the technical points that you're raising, and it's something which I think really sort of falls into careful consideration around the long-term plan. So it's that's probably the context where it needs to be appropriately geared, and to make sure that we're in a comfortable position or in an acceptable position regarding the renewals program. But I'll pass on to Matthew around his assessment of the work that's been done in council on this issue.
So through the chair, just a couple of other additional points, because I think, I mean, your point's well made. These are important issues and pretty fundamental to Auckland Transport's capital program. Just a couple of things. There's been some discussion this morning around the interim transport levy. So one of the responses made within Transport's program to the presence of that levy through until next year, 17-18, was a bit of an uplift in their renewal program. So one of the things we would say is that the LTP is the natural timing and place to reconsider the adequacy of their renewal programs going forward. And the only other thing that, so I guess I'm saying I think it's probably a little bit tough to have a substantive conversation for next year's budget around Auckland Transport Renewals Program, but set it up for the LTP. The other thing I would say is we have an internal audit program set up now across our main asset portfolios, so stormwater, inside water care and Auckland Transport. That's been run out of Auckland Council's internal audit office, and the purpose there is to dig in early and in a timely fashion around the adequacy of our asset management planning, which a lot of which strikes at the heart of the renewal question. So what I would say there is I think you can expect to be pretty well informed. My suggestion would be around, May, June, July next year, we'd be looking to come forward and have a good conversation around capital programs generally for LTP, but particularly with that internal audit having given a bit of a hurry up in the asset management planning space, I think we'll be well placed to have a good focus on the renewal issues.
Well, Mr Chair, I'll be happy. You're going to hear so much from me on this issue over the next few years, but okay. Just coming back to the issue of the targeted land rate, And I heard a comment earlier that the target land rate would discourage land banking, which is probably correct. I actually don't think that a lot of developers are that interested in hanging on to their land holdings if there's a great opportunity to capitalise it in a market where there is capital gain to be made. The issue is whether they want to do it this time, if that's the most prudent thing for them. But I wonder if there has been consideration as to whether the targeted rate would encourage already enthusiastic landowners to go out of sequence of the future urban land supply strategy. And if they do, if there is an appetite for that around this council, because that is one of the unintended consequences that could be triggered if we go down the targeted land rate, that actually people want to go right now, and we didn't necessarily have them sequenced to go right then and there, and so we might have to accept that they do. And that's a policy question, Mr. Chair, that I'm not sure the officers want to comment on that, but there will be costs if they do go out of sequence. Some of the costs will have to be borne by us.